Hi everyone, this is video example 2 for the camera tutorial series. In this example we're going to do some cutting tools. These are just, quick measurements to check your cutting tips haven't worn. We'll get some screenshots and things like that. So to give you an example, these are some of the tips we're going to measure. Things like this with a worn tip. So let's get going. So as always, the first thing we need to do is use the joystick to drive the camera somewhere near the component that we want to measure. This is good. At the moment we have the UV light on from the previous exercise. Just go to ring light controls, left click on here, and that switches it off. And it's generally a good idea just to autofocus, so we'll click that A. And as with previous exercise, the camera goes up and down looking for the best edge. At this stage, once it's stopped, we can right click on the Z readout and say lock axis. That keeps that locked. Now for measurement, I think it's best, as you can see the edges and chamfers on here. It's better to have a crisp edge with the UV light. But just as a beginner or big start of this exercise, what I want to highlight is the save image function. It's great when you have a worn out tip like this and you need to take an image of it. It also works for obviously any defects on parts. We can click save image and you have metrology image, current view or camera image. In most cases it's the camera image. That's what we'll use in this particular case. And if I go to the desktop and I'll call this broken tip, you'll see if we go to the desktop now, we have an image saved of the broken tip. Very useful for defect detection and highlighting any errors or problems with the tip. So that's to start off with. Now we want to get some measurements, so we'll switch to the UV light, press escape so it updates the camera, and we can now look to get some measurements. So very simple in this particular case. We will just get 2 lines and a tooltip radius, so we'll go line 1, 2, like that, line 1, 2, like that, and then we can change to arc, zoom right in, so 1, 2, 3, like that. And from this we can see in here we have a 55-degree cutting tip with a 0.4 radius on. Now these are so light and small, it's very difficult to measure that with a touch probe, so it's a great example of utilizing the camera. So this is an example number 1. Let's move on to tip 2. So it's a very similar exercise, just a slightly smaller tip. So we'll bring this over here. So we're pretty good there, but as with the previous exercise, we'll switch the UV light off. We'll do an autofocus. Notice the autofocus still works even though the Z-axis is locked. So as long as you're somewhere near, you can leave it locked and press autofocus, and there we're pretty good. So you can see already with this tip, we zoom right in, we have wear here. So we've got damage on the end of this tip. This will affect the measurement, but that's the whole idea of having the measurement in place. So let's switch over to UV and get some measurements. So we've got our measurement tools down here. We'll start with a circle. This can be our reference. Again, whether you want to use a reference system or not doesn't really matter if it's just a manual measurement, which is typically what we would do when measuring cutting tools. But you can still set up a reference system if you want, as so. and so bring the final edge in. And then the two tips we want to measure, we'll use the arc function here, here, and here. There we go. And then we'll do the same here. So arc 1, 2, 3. There we go. And from that, if we get some dimensions, we can check both angles. So this is an 80-degree tip with a 0.4 radius. And you can see the form error slightly higher on this one due to the damage, not majorly bad. And any other dimensions we needed, we can pull off as we go. So things like distance to tip center or edge. Just get rid of this. Things like that are useful if you're checking clearances and whatnot. So that's tip number 2, and we'll now move on to tip number 3. So to wrap things up, we will measure the third tip. Again, we'll just drive over somewhere near. So that's pretty good. And let's just use Vision Toolbar, Auto Focus, and let that verify that the thing's in focus. There we go. And again, very simple. You know, we can use this for visual checks on the tool, especially for any of the very small tips. And if we don't know anything about this tip, we can easily pull off some sizes for clearance checks and tip radius checks. So we'll dive straight in with a line measurement. And then the remaining measurements are arcs. So this is the rear arc here to here. Got the cutting tip arc, so 1, 2, 3, like that. There's the arc of the tip itself. And then we also want to measure a line on this edge here. So from that we can get the rear arc, the cutting face arc, the tip radius, that's a 0.1 tip. We can also measure from the back edge to the tip. This is to the center. We can right click and change this to maximum to go to the outside edge. This gives us a clearance from the back edge to the cutting tip, useful for going into pockets and things like that. And then we can also, if we need to check distances to the entire tip, we can go around and measure the remaining 3. So we'll go arc 1, 2, 3. Move the camera around. 1, 2, 3. There we go. And then construct a PCD from the tips. There we go. So this gives us an idea of the entire size of everything combined. And we can also from this get an idea of the clearances between the two circles. So very useful for analysing tips. And that concludes this example number 2 video for the camera tutorial series.